Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Pain, Heart, and Home Healing After Loss. If you haven't listened to the first two episodes where I talk about my story, my daughter's death, and how it all affected my health, my husband's health, I suggest you go listen to those first. It will give you a glimpse into all the parts of my life that have led me to where I am today, here speaking to you about my experience. And so those episodes really just kind of lay the foundation for everything I want to share here moving forward, including everything that I have learned from this amazing guest that I have here today. She is the person I give so much credit to when it comes to my healing journey. In some ways, I think I can say this woman literally brought me back to life and has changed it forever. It is my former grief counselor and now good friend, Rachel Tenpenny McGonigle. Rachel, thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak to my audience today.
Well, I was very excited. It's my pleasure. I'm just so honored to be part of this process and watch you go from so overwhelmed in your pain to now doing amazing things, feeling some hope, some healing, just so much more grounded and beautiful to watch.
Well, thank you. You have definitely seen me. I think you're one of the only people on this planet that has seen me at my absolute worst. So I'm honored that you get to be along the journey to watch me, come back and rise up from here. I wanted to mention I do have my tea for our session today.
Excellent.
As I did with every other one of our sessions together when I was going through counseling. So I thought it would be appropriate for this episode. So I want to get right into it because I want my listeners to just hear everything that you have to say today, as much of your wisdom as possible. Before we get into all the details about grief and specifically grief counseling, I just want everyone to know you and your story. You are incredibly credible, not just from your many years of helping people or your amazing reviews and testimonies from clients. All of those things are true, but it all starts with your personal experience. So, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your story regarding your loss and grief.
Sure. Well, first, I'd just like to clarify that I am a holistic grief coach. So I don't have, a degree in any of this. I didn't go to school. I'm not a doctor, but I found myself 16 years ago now bearing both of my baby daughters. Ellie died when she was 7 days old and Aubrey died when she was 13 days old. And I went from a young new mom on her second pregnancy with a 2.5-year-old son, getting ready to go to my baby shower for my new little baby girls, to the world falling apart in the blink of an eye. And within 2 weeks, I'm walking around a cemetery holding a map, trying to pick the plot that my baby daughters are going to be buried in. And it happened very fast. It was incredibly traumatic. And then before I knew it, I was thrust into this grief world, a world I knew nothing about. And it became very clear to me that really no one else did either. And I was just sort of left to wander. And the two things that stood out to me most right away was I really did want healing. I didn't know how to do it. There were moments when I thought, I don't even know if it's possible, because the pain was just so intense. I was so deeply sad. But I also was 28 years old, had a beautiful 2.5-year-old son, and still felt like I had a lot of life left. And deep down inside somewhere, I believe there has to be a way where this is not the end for me, right? Grief can't be all there is for me. So I went searching. I was proactive. I set out to seek advice, therapy. I read every book. This was a long time ago, so this dates me a little bit, but we had AOL chat rooms you went into with other grieving moms, or, I was just trying to find anything and everything that would help me orient myself towards healing instead of feeling stuck in my pain. And it was an absolute nightmare out there. The amount of times I was told a mother who loses a child will never be okay. Once a griever, always a griever. I had a woman come and actually bring me a meal, come and visit my home, and her son had died as an infant 12 years prior to me. And she told me that she had not laughed in 12 years, right? This was the encouragement, the support, the people who had gone before me. This is what they were telling me and how they were leading me. Support groups actually became the place where I learned what I don't want how I don't want to be. They were really, they scared me straight in a lot of ways, if that makes sense. And again, they didn't give me answers. I didn't come away going, oh, now I know what to do for myself. All I knew is that there's no way I could stay in the amount of pain I was in for the rest of my life. I needed to know that there was some way that I could shift it or lessen it. And the longer that time went on, the more I realized time was not the answer. Enough time was not going to resolve my pain. So I promised myself, as well as my two little girls, that I would figure out how to heal practically, relationally, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And then I would tell everybody who wanted to know. And it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was definitely a school of hard knocks. I learned a lot about what doesn't work before I learned what does work. But I've taken 16 years of grief and healing experience and turned it into a program so that other people can better understand what they're feeling, access the tools and resources that are truly helpful, avoid the things that are not helpful, that keep you stuck, that are confusing. There's a lot of grief lies, a lot of myths, a lot of misunderstandings out there. I help sort through that from the get-go, so you don't have to spend years and years sorting through it like I did. And then I integrate a holistic component because grief affects our body just as much as it does our heart, our mind, our relationships, our spirituality, our faith. So I build people up with very, very practical nutrition and protocols and self-care, supplements, all kinds of things that seem simple, but they're very much missing from the grief support that's out there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love it. And I'll be honest with you, when I first started coming to you for counseling, I was super hesitant, as I've mentioned to you before. Like, I was reluctant because I was like, nobody can help me. Like, what is anyone gonna simply say with words to me that will make this pain any better? But even just hearing you tell your story to me about your daughters for the first time that you told me, I immediately just, I felt safe with you. Because one of the hardest things that we go through after a tragic or profound loss is relating to people. And we usually are not surrounded by a bunch of people in our daily lives who have gone what we have gone through, what we have gone through. So we feel lonely and we feel like nobody understands us. And honestly, most people don't, or they certainly can't relate to our specific situation. So even though I was really hesitant about going through counseling, as soon as I knew your story, I just wanted to talk to you more. Even before I really knew you, what you offered, like I didn't even really care if you had anything helpful to say. I just was so desperate to talk candidly with someone who understood what it felt like to not only lose someone tragically, but to lose their own child. And so I quickly knew that you were the right person for the job for me, even if you didn't say anything helpful, which you certainly did. Um, I was immediately like just, drawn in.
I've noticed that's a common experience for grievers, though. The
Hmm.
very first thing they really need is to feel seen. And I know that's
Hmm.
like a buzzword, right? Oh, I need to feel seen and heard. But it really is true. We need our grief to be witnessed, not necessarily fixed, not necessarily, um, you know, for the reason of what to do about it, but just to get some validation around the fact that it really does hurt this bad. And is there
Hmm.
anyone who can say, yes, right. I get it, or I agree. And it is even about comparing grief because I work with a lot of different kinds of grievers. Not all of my grievers have lost children.
Hmm.
I've worked with every kind of loss imaginable. And we build that same rapport, even if we don't have the same kind of loss, because it is a safe place, but we're also able to open up and talk in a way where we're really heard and understood. And I know you remember, and I won't talk about what we talked about, but there is a level of honesty where you finally get to say all of the things that you don't want to say out loud because you're afraid
Hmm.
of what other people will think, how they'll land, what they really mean. Sometimes we feel angry, we feel mistreated, we feel confused, we feel we're questioning our beliefs, we're mad at the people that are closest to us. We don't want to ruin relationships, right? I just put out a reel today saying, usually when you're really, really angry, especially if you care about being a good person, you won't talk about how angry you are. You won't say the things that are just churning in there and that seething feeling of, I remember having fantasies, I'll be honest. of knocking people's blocks off because I was sick and tired of the platitudes and the
Yeah.
cliches and dismissive comments. And I would think, like, if I could just muster up the courage right now, like, I'd punch you straight in the throat. Like, that's
For sure.
how deeply wounding and frustrating and hurtful it was that it just came up in this anger. Or I'd think, I want to get in my car and hit your car with my car, just so you know how incredibly upset I am. And it was because I felt lonely, I felt afraid. But
Right.
it wasn't until I was able to get an environment where I could be honest. And all my honesty wasn't rage, just some of it was, a little bit of it was. But to
Right.
be able to say, like, this is really how bad it hurts, and this is really where I do not feel understood, and this is really the things that people have said to me that hurt or angered me or are confusing. These are things I used to believe that now I'm not so sure I believe anymore. I need to work this out. Like, there's this whole dismantling of our entire life and being that happens when we go through a tragic loss. And um, there's two paths out there. Everyone is either talking about how painful it is, how there's no hope, how once a griever, always a griever, you're just stuck, no one gets it, you'll carry this pain for the rest of your life, right? Very depressing, very powerless. There's a lot of powerlessness in that kind of talk. And then there's sort of this other path that's like, everything happens for a reason. One day it will be revealed to you why this tragedy had to happen because it's making you who you need to be, right? There's some sort of meaning in it. And both of those extremes are so terrible. There's just a painful, painful place to be. Because yes, I was hurting and angry and frustrated, but I didn't want to stay that way. But I also knew deep in my heart of hearts that my daughters were not expendable for some greater good, and I wasn't going to stumble upon the necessity of their deaths. I knew that I had a choice to make, and if their life was going to have meaning, if there was going to be any purpose in all of this pain, it was going to be purpose I had to create. And as I was looking for help, for guidance, for advice, I wasn't finding any. And it wasn't until I actually said that out loud. Here's how frustrated I am. Here's what I want that I can't find. Here's how I feel misunderstood. Here's how bad I'm hurting. It released me to be able to start moving forward instead of allowing all of that confusion and frustration to keep churning on the inside, holding me back. And that's why that's the very first thing I do with all of my clients. We just spend some time listening, like I listen and they talk and they tell me everything they haven't said that they really, really want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like you were just saying, that lack of power out there, all of the things that you just said is just so amazing. But like, you don't, that's nowhere out there unless you find somebody who is educated and skilled in this area and you seek out those things. Which brings me to my next point, which is one of the biggest misconceptions about loss and grief has to do with time. Like, we've all heard the saying, time heals all wounds. And I would say that one of the most important things that I learned from, during our sessions is that sure, time can change our grief and it can change our pain, but it does not heal you on its own. You have to seek it out. Time is not the healer of our grief. And that learning to heal from and work through our grief is a learned skill. It is absolutely learned. And there's not enough resources out there, in my opinion. We don't just wake up one day and know intuitively what to do next in our grief and how to not feel powerless, like you were talking about.
Yeah, that's one of the lies out there, that everyone
Right,
intrinsically knows how to journey their own grief,
right.
right? Walk their own grief path. And while that sounds very sweet, I feel it's actually just dismissiveness in disguise. It's really society saying, can you please not bother us with your journey? I'd rather you just figure it out yourself, right?
Yeah,
Intrinsically, everyone has what they need. No, they don't. Because if they did, then we would not have as many grievers feeling stuck, feeling overwhelmed, not making the progress that they want to make. And when I say progress, I'm not talking about it in the American sense of the word, like productivity, like we always need to be doing more. I'm talking about, when I say progress, the belief that if you find yourself in a place that you don't want to stay in, you have the power to move yourself to the place that you do want to be in. And it's not about if it's, where other people want you to be, or if it has to do with being productive, right? Productivity. It's just about understanding that we might not have control over everything that happens in our life. We don't have control over what the people in our life do, but we always are in charge of our inner world. And nobody can make our heart feel, think, or do anything without our permission, right? That's like Viktor Frankl. If you ever want to read an amazing book, Viktor Frankl's The Man's Search for Meaning is phenomenal. And he pretty much irons out that principle that even someone who can take your life cannot take the attitude that you have, the perspective that you choose to keep, how you decide to treat people, how you want to view the world. And, and he lost his entire family in the Holocaust, and he put his life back together after one of the world's absolute most tragic events. He was tortured, he was mistreated, he was abused and neglected, he was starved and lost his entire family. Yet he came out of the Holocaust with this deep belief that at the end of the day, he is the one who gets to decide whether he pursues life with love, gratitude, appreciation, purpose, and meaning, or bitterness, resentment, anger, powerlessness, you name it. And it's an incredibly powerful book because grievers love to compare their grief. They love to make up, a good case for why it's different for them. It's harder for them. They're the one person that can't have a certain outcome. Maybe someone else can, but they're the exception. It's different for them. And it's really hard. It's one thing to put, two random people in a room and try to decide whose grief is worse. But when somebody experiences the Holocaust and lives to tell about it, it's really hard to say, well, they don't really make a point because all of our grief is different. Right. And it is. All of our grief is different. We don't have to compare. But for those who fall into that trap of comparing, sometimes reading other people's stories, leaning into some of the things people have overcome in life, the ways that they have found purpose and meaning in some of the most horrific things, can really do a lot to impact our inner world when we're working through those hard decisions, trying to decide how we're going to show up in a circumstance and in a life that we didn't choose and we never wanted, ever.
Yeah.
Right? No matter how much good comes, quote, out of it, which I hate. Like, look at all the good that's come out of it.
Right.
Oh, really? You think that good was more good than my two little girls? Like, come on. And any good that's come out of it was good I chose. It's good I fought for. It's good I created because I said, I don't want my pain to be for nothing. I don't want these little girls to only be remembered in death. I want them honored in life, right? Those were all my participatory decisions. And I work with my clients on that as well to show them how much power they have. Whenever I hear that phrase, I have no choice, or I had no choice, oh, and it's all over the grief world, right? When people tell me I'm strong, they don't know I have no choice. Okay, well, first of all, those of you who are not grieving, don't tell grievers they're so strong. It's just it's a hard thing to hear.
Yeah.
So we don't feel strong. We feel like we're a mess, right? We're just trying to get through.
Yeah.
But the griever, when you are told that, it's very important to recognize that this whole I don't have a choice is absolutely not true. You do have a choice. You don't have to get out of bed every day if you don't want to. You don't have to go to work and pay your bills. You don't have to take care of your kids or participate in your marriage. You don't have to feel any certain feelings or try to have certain kind of attitude. Like, all of these things are choices you make. They might be hard choices, and they might be in the face of some circumstances that you don't like, want, and couldn't change. But you are making choices every single day. And it's important to recognize those choices instead of sort of brainwash ourselves into this belief, well, I have no choice. Now, do some of those choices have different ramifications or consequences that might motivate us, right? But really, all of your choices always come from our value system. If you're going, well, I don't have a choice, I have to get up every day to go to work and take care of my kids. You don't have to. You could choose to be the type of person that doesn't take care of their kids and doesn't pay their bills, right? If you choose to do that, what you're actually reflecting is your value system. You're saying, even in the face of pain and loss and tragedy, I believe that there's a certain minimum standard of conduct that if I don't meet, I'm a terrible person, right? That's not acceptable behavior. So I am going to continue going to work. I am going to continue paying the bills. I am going to continue taking care of my kids, even though on the inside, I wish I could just opt out. But my value system is compelling me to make these choices. not, oh, I don't have a choice.
Right.
Because you do have a choice. And believe it or not, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients, and I see people make those choices all the time.
Right.
They opt out. They don't pay the bills. They don't get out of bed. They don't make beneficial or healing choices. They don't take care of their kids. I see it all the time. It's very real.
Right. Yeah. And it's really sad. I think that just goes to show exactly what we started talking about was how it's such a learned skill, but there's such a lack of information out there. And the fact that there are so many people who do choose to not do those things, who choose to not get up out of bed and take care of their families and all that. It's like that's a lack of information, a lack of feeling equipped and like feeling like they have the knowledge. Like I'll be the first to admit it. Like I never looked at it like that. I never looked at it like, oh, I just need the right tools. This is why I was so hesitant to go to you at first, because I was like, what's she going to just say to help? It's not about just saying the right things. It's about having the right tools and the resources to make the hard choice, to make the choice to be strong, if you want to call it that. But that's when I realized that counseling isn't just about, someone saying all the right things. It's about teaching you those practical skills and tools, which is most likely in the field of something you've never been through. But they have, the grief counselor has, just like you would go to a fitness expert if you wanted to lose weight, or, a financial advisor if you wanted to handle your money better. Why wouldn't you go to a counselor who specializes in grief? But that goes back to what you said at the beginning, like early on in your grief, everybody thinks like, well, this is worse than that. Like nobody can help me. Nobody knows. It's like, and I understand early on in my grief, that is how I felt. Like from experience, I can say that is how you feel early on in your grief. But once you can, take a second, give it a couple months or whatever it is to kind of come back, you realize that, those tools are out there, and it's, for you and I, our mission is to make it more known to everybody that there are tools and resources.
Well,
So
not all grief, counseling, therapy, coaching, it's not all equal. And that's, this whole idea that like all life skills, grief skills are life skills and they need to be learned.
Mhm.
That is a new concept for most people. And for a lot of people, it's incredibly comforting to realize, oh, I'm not supposed to just magically know how to do this.
Right.
My frustration, my overwhelm, my struggles with what next step to take is normal because I need to learn these skills. I've never been in this place before. And depending on where you come from, your family, what's modeled to you, your own natural personality, we have different levels of these skills. Some of us have more or less of them. But most everyone realizes when they are in a grief experience that they are lacking at least some of these skills. It becomes very apparent, right? I'm not fully equipped for this. And the goal of that is to be reassuring and comforting to say, yeah, you're not supposed to be. Like, you're not failing. You're not doing it wrong. There's not something wrong with you. It's just these skills need to be learned. And you didn't even know you didn't know them until you had a traumatic loss experience. And then the other side of that is there's a ton of coaches, therapists, counselors, you name it, who actually know nothing about grief, even though they say they help with grief. They've not had a grief experience. And that doesn't necessarily disqualify you, because I do know some pretty amazing people out there who have not had a significant loss, but they are very equipped to help people with grief.
Hmm.
But they're definitely the exception, not the norm. But that's why
Sure.
people get so frustrated with talk therapy or uh, you know, programs at church or things, because one, either people are not equipped to actually help with moving yourself through grief, or what happens is people just talk a lot about their grief. And then they that's somehow supposed to change things. And we've
Right.
all been there. This, like I said, support groups taught me so much about what not to do, because I had to have that moment when I realized I have to leave my support groups, because I tried many thinking, well, maybe this one will be different. Maybe this one will offer more. Maybe this one will be more helpful. They weren't, because just talking about how much pain you're in and talking about how frustrated you are and talking about how misunderstood you are is not a healing path. And there's
Right.
definitely two types of grievers. There's grievers who just want to talk about how much pain they're in. And then there's grievers who actually want to do something about it.
Right.
And if you're that second category, you often have to leave the ones that want to be stuck and want their grief to be their identity and want to keep wallowing in their pain. And I know that sounds harsh, and trust me, I get a lot of pushback on this, a lot, but it's true.
Yeah.
If you want healing in your life, you're going to have to do more than just talk about how much pain you're in.
Right. Right. Yeah. Shout it from the rooftops.
But the
That
amazing
exact
thing is,
sentence.
what you can do is actually incredibly effective, incredibly practical, right? No, people do not have to go get a PhD in grief recovery in
Right.
order to, there's very beginning small things that give you a ton of return on investment. That's why the very first thing I put you on is your tea ritual. The second
Right.
thing I put you on are supplements. The third thing is I adjust your nutrition, your exercise, because within 1 week, those things already start returning. That you do feel better. You are sleeping better. You have a little more energy. You feel more
Yes.
centered.
And exactly what I was going to bring up next, which is another misconception about, or, something about grief that people don't really understand, which is whether or not they're in it, whether they're the griever or an observer, they don't understand is how much of a physical toll that grief takes on our physical bodies. Everyone associates grief with all mental and emotional, which is definitely the biggest part of it, but it takes a huge toll physically too. And like you just said, those are the first steps that you take with your clients is, talking about how to support you physically. So can you just briefly explain like how grief affects our physical bodies? Because most people don't understand this.
Sure. So all emotional healing is built on the foundation of physical health and well-being. So we have to get our body back to at least a baseline. We don't have to be the healthiest person in the world, but we do need to have a baseline that is aware that the toll of grief is profound on our physical health. So it modifies how our brain works, and not just our brain chemistry, but also our brain electricity. We get flooded with what's called beta waves, and beta waves are the survival mode, right? Fight or flight kind of brain waves that are very helpful if all we're trying to do is stay alive. But they are not helpful to us if we're trying to revive or eventually even thrive. Future thinking, philosophical thinking, hope, dreams, goals, all of those things shut down when only beta waves are in our head. We need alpha waves in order to think about those things. And so one of the first things I do is there's actual ways, and you know them because we did them with you, that can encourage more alpha wave activity and quiet that overwhelming beta wave activity so that concepts like hope can even be understood. And what a lot of people don't realize is often when grievers are struggling with hope, it's not just an emotional issue or even a spiritual issue. It's a physical issue. Their brain is in overdrive and is literally blocking their capacity for concepts like hope. We blame emotional issues, but it's actually a physical manifestation of our pain. Then it affects our body. It annihilates our immune system. It dysregulates our central nervous system. It affects our lungs, our liver, our adrenal function, our heart, our what I'm trying to say, our inflammation, like it causes a lot of inflammation. It's basically a prolonged hyper stress response that's burning through all of our B vitamins, burning through all of our minerals. We need extra supplements. We need extra support. We're usually exhausted. Our bandwidth shrinks. And it's not just an emotional exhaustion, it's a physical exhaustion. We need more rest. And then we're struggling with sleep because grief often impacts our sleep. So we need to do the things that get us sleeping. That's always the first thing we do. We get sleeping. Then we get way more nutrition in our body. And I map out exactly how that should look and how it should not look, because there are things you should not do. And then I modify exercise because either people don't exercise at all or they exercise way too much. And too much exercise is just another form of self-medication. And all it does is deplete you, run you down, use up the little tiny stores of minerals and vitamins you have left, rob you of your physical and emotional energy. And then ideas like, wow, I think grief really is forever, right? I think I will be sad for the rest of my life. Has nothing to do with any truth about grief and everything to do with your body is so worn down, it can't even think about hopeful, meaningful things. And that's not fair. And we get it confused. We think that these physiological manifestations of the toll of our grief is an emotional truth. And it's not. And But we're so worn down by our grief, we need someone to help us interpret all of those things.
Right.
We need someone to help us
Yes.
see what we can't see.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened with me. I had no idea of any of this until I met you and we, discussed. As a matter of fact, I remember thinking to myself when the idea was presented to me, I literally remember having this thought, when I physically feel better, then I'll start counseling because this is when I was like the deepest stuck in fight or flight. Like my body was reacting in the craziest ways. I was having random symptoms and in and out of the doctor's office, literally thinking I was like, everything's going wrong. Like my body was shutting down on me is what it felt like. Little did I know that counseling, was the very thing that I needed to help me with what my body was going through physically, because you pointed out to me so many useful tools and resources I didn't even know were relevant to me. Like I said, I met you when I was at my lowest mentally, physically, and, when I was stuck in that fight or flight, I didn't realize how much of it could be treated with just, physical things. I thought I needed to just, every day I would wake up, I thought it was, I just need to talk myself out of this anxiety today. And it's like, that's just not the case. There's so many physical things going on inside the body that we can help in an external way. It's not just talking yourself out of grief. And I am a perfect example of that, as you know. Because,
And that's another myth, is that with enough willpower, right? You
right.
just need to change your mindset. Well, there's no such thing as changing your mindset if you have no minerals in your body.
Yeah.
If you haven't
Right.
slept for 5 days, it doesn't
Right.
matter how much willpower, how much you're willing to have positive thinking, which we have to be careful because there is a such thing as toxic positivity. By the way, there's also such thing as toxic compassion. We don't talk about that enough. Um, we need to know, okay, is this actually a mindset problem or an emotional struggle? Or is this my body telling me I don't have what I need? It doesn't matter how mentally tough, I use this analogy a lot. When our special forces, right, our Navy SEALs and our Green Berets, and like these guys are the elite of all the elite. And I got a very special privilege, maybe, gosh, 10 years ago or so, to go meet a ton of top special forces guys that were helping us raise money for something called the Rosie Project, which was basically to support, because my ex-husband is military, and they were to support military people or their spouses who've created jobs or started businesses. And so I was there representing my previous company with my sister, and because we started T Motion, so we had a T line for emotional well-being. She still has, it still exists. It's not my company anymore. And but I was backstage, and it was my job to get all of these Navy SEALs onto the stage for their speaking moment, like in the right order. And I'll be honest, it was a lot like herding cats. They very much wanted to be on their own schedule, but we figured it out. But as a very positive side of it, I got to spend time talking with a lot of them and their spouses, and just really wonderful, fascinating conversations. And all of them, one of the things they said was, everybody thinks that being, in special forces means you have no limits, you have no boundaries, you always push harder, you always go through, you can endure what no one else can endure, right? Your limits are way higher than everyone else's limits. And they said it's actually not true. It's the exact reverse. We are crystal clear on what our limits are. We know what's too much for us. We know how long we can go without food. We know when not enough sleep is going to tank us, right? We know what our pain threshold is. We know how long we can be cold until we get hypothermia. Because when you're aware of what your limits are, then you conduct yourself strategically to make sure you stay the heck away from those limits,
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. I do.
right? And that's a method, and that's why I set up my program the way I set it up. Because our
Right.
goal, it's not that we're not going to learn or grow, or we're never going to do uncomfortable things, but we're going to do them in the context that they are within our capacity. Because our capacity, we can grow it, but we don't grow it by constantly pushing ourselves to the brink of what we're capable of all the time.
Right.
And
Yes.
willpower is very much a part of that. Like, I just have to force myself beyond what my limits. Well, that's actually the best way to break yourself down, lose
Right.
hope, get disconnected from your identity, and start believing that you don't have what it takes. Because you
Right.
do have what it takes. Everyone has what it takes. They just have to know
Yes.
how to use it and what their limits are, instead of constantly just, this whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps concept. It doesn't work in grief.
Right. Yeah, and you were so good at that, like during our sessions, which again leads me to the next thing that I was going to ask you, or that I want you to kind of explain, because it was another thing that really resonated with me when we did our sessions together. And that was, you had me take a personality test. Well, several personality tests. And they were very intricate. They took a little while. And even before I got the results and we had talked about them, again, that was something that you did that made me think, she really wants to get to know me and how I operate and think. I wasn't just another person. I wasn't just another, like, your client number 34 or whatever the heck. You wanted to get to know me and how I thought, how I operated. And that was another huge turning point for me in my counseling, because you were able to give me such specific advice that's not just directed to the general public, but to me, my personality, my specific needs, my limits, like you were just talking about, etc. So can you just kind of explain with everyone, like, why you have your clients take those personality tests?
Well, from a very practical perspective, there's no way that a one size fits all approach could be effective for grievers. There's just too many variables, different people, different losses, different backgrounds. There's just too much different stuff. And I always have all of my clients create a self-care protocol. And it's this self-care protocol that helps them understand what they need, how to get those needs met. But a self-care protocol is only going to work if it aligns with your natural personality and your lifestyle. It can't
Right.
be someone else's self-care protocol, because then we won't use it. We won't do it. It becomes a chore, or it becomes, like a pill that we swallow, as opposed to an activity that we're integrating. Because the goal of self-care is not just while I'm grieving, or it's forever. It's a new way of understanding ourselves and taking care of ourselves. Because while I don't believe that the pain of grief is permanent, I believe that our loss impacts our life forever. So a self-care that lasts forever, right? A protocol that lasts forever. And it changes and modifies, but you can do so because you're aware of why you do certain things, instead of just trying to follow a script or check boxes. So when you
Right.
spend time really and it's not just so I can get to know you, it's so you can get to know you, so that you have a deeper awareness of who you are, how you work, your God-given personality. Because working with that creates longevity, as opposed to working against it creates frustration and resistance. And so as I help you understand who you are, and then I get that insight as well, then I can point out, here's something that's going to be really advantageous for you. Here's something that will, is something you want to stay away from because it's not going to work with you or for
Right.
you. Here's something you need to think about or comprehend, right? Here's even simple things like learning if you're extroverted or introverted. First of all, learning what that means, because the way that our culture teaches it is wrong. It's just like, oh, one person's outgoing, the other person's shy. That is not extroversion and introversion,
Right.
by the way. So getting clear about what it is and what it isn't. But once you understand what that means for you, the decisions you make for your support system, to set your limits, to understand yourself, to figure out what you need, to be able to ask for help, completely changes through that filter, because now you know what actually works for you versus just grasping at straws. Because it's that grasping, it's just all the trial and error of it all. That's what leads people to believe the pain of grief is permanent.
Yeah, exactly.
Tons of effort without any return, right? Where
Right.
I switch that and go, we want the most return on the least amount of effort. Because when we're grieving, we have about this much energy. We don't
Yes.
have our full bandwidth. So if we
Hmm.
can't get maximum return on minimum input, we'll fizzle out and we'll give up on ourselves and we'll stay stuck in our pain.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love how you just flipped that around, because that's exactly what you did, and that's exactly what you teach. And like you said, when we're, especially early on, we have this much energy to give, and so you have to use it so wisely. You have to put it in, the most effective places you can. And going back to something you said, which is how we learn ourselves. It's not just you learning us. That's a part of it, but it's also us learning us. I thought I really knew who I was and what my personality traits were all going to be. But the specific test that you had me take really revealed a lot about myself to me, and it forced me to be honest with myself. It forced me to answer based on who not not based on who I want to be, but based on who I really am right now, so that I could care and nurture for that version of myself, the best way that I could. So, learning about yourself and your own needs and developing that self-care plan, as you call it, is a huge part of your sessions. And you do talk a lot about getting through grief and the pain, especially in those early days. You talk a lot about it's not about controlling the things around us, but it's about putting on our armor and learning to care for ourselves through the storm that we're in. And one of the biggest things that we cannot control when we are grieving is the people around us, and what they say, how they treat us, how they respond to our grief, and how we choose to grieve. And you really opened my eyes a lot to a lot of things that I probably would have never even acknowledged when it came to other people and how they affected me in my grieving. Um, but that leads me to what I want to talk about next, which is how we continue to walk through our grief and healing journey despite what anyone else has to say about it, or how they treat us. I would bet if you're listening to this and you are a griever yourself, you have at least one, but probably more than one person who has either said something really stupid to you about your loss, or has treated you differently since your loss, or who really wasn't there for you in the way that you thought that they would be after your loss. And Rachel, you and I spent several weeks talking about this during our sessions. And so can you share your biggest advice to grievers on how to handle these people? And I know that that is a loaded question, but if you could boil it all down,
We
what
could
would
do
your biggest
full
piece of advice
separate,
be?
yeah,
We
podcast on
really
just
could.
it.
We really could. And maybe we will one day. But if you could boil it down, like, what would your biggest advice be?
Learning how to set boundaries and have healthy expectations of other people through your grief is a superpower. It saves so much pain and emotional energy because grief grief is a magnifying glass. Okay, grief is like a spotlight. It reveals it. If there's anything there, if there's a problem, an issue, a struggle, a weakness, right? And if also a strength, right? A greater capacity, all of these things become revealed in our pain. And oftentimes it is the hardship and pain of grief that reveals, oh, this relationship I thought was one way, but it's actually this way, right? Or, this person I thought was this, but I realize now that, they're like this. And it's not about judging them. It's just when we get that realization, okay, when we go, this isn't what I thought. It's up to us to say, okay, then what boundary am I going to set here so that I can care for myself the way that I need to without allowing myself, this person, to steal any energy from, or essentially giving them too much power in our lives, right? We need to keep that power for our own accountability and our own, intentional healing. Because what happens is we often do, because this is what pain does, unfortunately. And the sooner we can catch ourselves in this, the better. Pain says, somebody save me, somebody help me, somebody make this less hard for me, right? I'm drowning here. And then other people come along and just make it worse when we thought that they're supposed to make it better. And then we're mad, and then we are scared, and we feel even more confused and more hopeless. But we can get tunnel vision, because that's what pain does. Instead of being able to say, okay, I'm not at their mercy. Even if they don't treat me the way that I hope, or say something that didn't actually help me, or I can still take care of myself. And as I take care of myself, it opens up my eyes to the people who turn out to be the great support system, or the safe place, or the situation that does work, or whatever it is. But those boundaries, that ability to not give others so much power and keep that power for ourselves, is how we steer our grief and our pain towards healing, instead of just sort of bouncing off everyone in our life going, why aren't you making it easier for me? How come you don't understand me better? Right? Because it's
Right.
great. It's loss on loss. There is, and I address this in my program. We actually do a whole, whole workshop essentially on how to grieve the people who didn't show up well for us, the relationships that got lost, the epiphanies and the heartbreaks that came from this magnification. It's layered losses, right? Our loss
Hmm.
is never one loss.
Yeah.
It
Oh, yeah.
it starts with that loss, and then it's just a cascade of a domino effect of losses. And all of those losses need to be addressed and processed, and we need to get some honesty around those things. But in every moment, we also need to understand when we might be giving our power away or giving someone else too much power, when in reality, we need to take that back for ourselves and say, nope, this is actually my responsibility for my heart. It isn't someone else's responsibility to know what I need,
Right.
to say it the way I need to hear it. Right. And then we go,
Yes.
okay. And I also don't have to hate their guts anymore either,
Right.
because they didn't
Right.
do it well for me.
Yes. Taking responsibility is huge. And to quote my husband, Rick, he always says to the kids, who can you control? Like anytime they're mad at what somebody else did to them, he's just the first thing out of his mouth is, who can you control? And, or he'll say, whose actions can you control? And the answer is always, they always say your own, because now they know.
Because I
And
think they're
even though
being
we don't,
tortured, even though they're
right,
being taught wonderful life lessons.
exactly. And even though we don't want this to be true while we're grieving, because it would just be so much easier, like you said, to just blame everything on everyone else and to point the finger at others and say, can you believe they treated me like that, and make it their problem? Like at the end of the day, like we can only control our own actions and how we respond to others who don't understand our grief, which, to your point, and everything you teach is why it's so important that we care for ourselves during that really fragile time that we're in, because we have the weight of the world on our shoulders, after this, tragic or profound loss, and maybe now you're suffering from a sickness because of it, or you're stuck in fight or flight like I was. Like, the last thing we want to do is deal with other people treating us poorly too. Like you said, it's those layered losses, which we could do a whole nother podcast just on that. And so we have to remind ourselves that what they do is not our responsibility. And when we take care of ourselves first and are strict on our self-care protocols, like you call them, we have more power and more control over ourselves and how we respond to those people. And so we can become less bothered by what everyone else is doing.
Sure. Don't forget, I also teach repair methods as well, because there are
Yes.
some things in our grief that we go, you know what, that's just not a hill I'm willing to die on. I'm going to let
Yes.
that one go. I'm going to focus on my healing, other things, right? And I'm not going to pursue that. But there are other areas in our life where we think, you know, either I don't want to lose this relationship, or I want them to know and understand how that impacted me or affected me. And, because people make mistakes, okay? Even the people who love us most can miss the mark. And we want to be careful that in our grief, we are not just deciding to end or be done with people or relationships because we felt hurt. We do want to be able to have an appropriate assessment to say, like, how much does this relationship still mean to me? And what am I willing to do to create repair? And I teach a protocol on how to actually go and talk to the people and share your experience from a place of, I call them I feel statements, but from what you experience, so that it's not accusatory, it's not attacking, but it is honest, to see how much that communication can create repair. Because it can, right? Not all of our relations should just be expendable because we're grieving, but we are allowed to need what we need, set different boundaries, and make adjustments. And oftentimes, the people who really care about us the most will acknowledge, you're right. I didn't understand. I didn't get that what I was saying, hit you that way. Or I didn't get that by not calling. Like, I thought calling or not calling was helpful. I didn't realize it was hurtful, right? And they want to do the repair, and the communication takes place, and people feel understood, and then they can move forward going, they don't know how to help me with grief either. We live in a
Right.
grief ignorant society. And
Right.
then the people who don't want to do the repair, who are like, I don't care, or this is about me, or I just don't appreciate how you're making me feel. Well, then we realize that there needs to be some modifications in that relationship. So either
Right.
way, we get answers, we can make informed decisions. Um, but giving our heart a voice and having the tools and the skills to effectively communicate how we feel and what we need is essential. Grief is not a reason not to communicate. It's a reason to learn how to communicate even better than we've ever
Yes.
communicated in our lives.
Yes, absolutely. I love how you just put that, because I remember early on, I'm talking early on, like the first couple weeks after Layla had died, you know, um, my mom kept encouraging me, just keep, we're going off of, we're kind of responding with how you are doing, if you're happy, if you're laughing, like we'll laugh with you, if you're crying, we'll cry with you. And that kind of morphed into mm, opening up the door and giving me permission to just tell everybody around me, this is what I'm feeling right now. You know, this is how I'm not feeling. This is what would be great. This is what would not be great. And it just worked. Now, that was when I was around like my tightest people. That was literally like my husband, my mom, and my sister, who we like basically lived together for the first couple of weeks. But once you learn how to, have those communication skills, like you can branch out to those like next layers of people, and it is life changing. Like when you stop playing, that victim, and you start, taking power over, or taking control over, your own actions, and stop being so bothered by what they're doing, or stop being such a victim to their actions, and go, you know what, this is what I need from you. This is how this makes me feel. Like, I would appreciate if you did this or didn't do this. It's like, if they're going to take that offensively, like, that's their issue, like, you didn't do anything wrong. Like, we're all adults here. Like, we can communicate appropriately to each other and have a conversation. I should be able to share with you. And like you said, if the person is responsive, like, we want to give them that opportunity to have that repair. It's not just an excuse to go, well, I don't have any relationships anymore. But if they don't respond well, that's when it's like, okay, maybe it's time to do some reevaluating. And that was huge for me. I want to move on to one of the last things, because I don't want to run out of time before we are able to talk about this. And I want to talk about probably one of your biggest mottos, which is the tagline of what I would say of your, career, which is, you have power over your pain. Power over your pain is what I hear you say all the time. And, to those listening, like, yes, we suffered a terrible, tragic, profound loss, whatever it was. Yes, this really terrible thing happened to us. Our world came crumbling down in a matter of seconds, and there's nothing good intrinsically about the loss itself that we suffered. But that doesn't mean we can't have power over our pain that we now face, on a daily basis, meaning we don't have to let the pain absolutely consume us. And so I just want to give you, Rachel, an opportunity to, again, I know this is a loaded question, but if you could explain it in a couple of sentences or one explanation to everyone, a little bit more of what it really means to have power over your pain.
We could go really, really deep, because I do think this is not only my tagline, right, intrinsic to everything that I teach. It's woven through every aspect of my program, every time that I speak. But it also comes from my own deep convictions and my own faith about how we as human beings are wired, are built. And the fact that we were given free will, that we are autonomous beings, is the most powerful thing we have. And if we are going to allow grief to convince us that we are no longer autonomous, we no longer have free will, we're denying our own humanity. We're denying our own value. We're denying our own worth. And then that trickles down to also how it affects the people that we love, the people that we have responsibility towards. So for me, it wasn't so much like, oh, I have power over my own pain. My pain will not win. Like, this is not, like a fairy tale story for me.
Right.
It was more a fact, because I can have power over my pain, because I have free will and I'm an autonomous being. I might not be able to control everything around me or even the people around me, but I am still in charge of how I respond. And that is what creates my humanity. Because if I can't, then I'm just at the whim. I'm at the mercy of life, of fate, of luck, of others. And there's no reason to live. There's no value if we're just powerless beings at the whim of everyone's choices or circumstances outside of our control. And I, because of my personal faith and my personal convictions, do not believe that that is what it means to be human. I believe we were given power, we were given value, we were put here to make a contribution. We have a calling in our life. And if I was going to let grief just take that call, just decide for me and say, actually, you're powerless, that becomes a slippery slope. Because if we're powerless when really hard things happen or pain happens or loss happens, then what else are we powerless? And now there's no accountability, there's no perspective, there's no opportunity to impact. And then that's when we start losing even bigger concepts like love, because love is a choice. But if we don't have any choices, then we can't even love. And I refused to accept that. So for me, it was actually a philosophical process that led me to this understanding that if all it takes is a tragic loss to sort of annihilate my humanity, then what hope do we have? And I believe in hope. I believe in purpose. I believe in meaning. I believe that there's something greater than myself going on here, right? I'm just part of this. I'm not the center of this. And so I wanted to fight for what I felt was valuable and bigger than me and more important. And these were the ideas that I raised my children with, that I love my husband with, that I get involved in my community with, right? And I just couldn't give them up because Aubrey Nellie died. And trust me, I want to be very clear because I think sometimes this can be forgotten. I'm over 16 years out and I have worked incredibly hard in my own healing. But who I am today is not who I was back then. I was a broken, devastated young mom who did not understand how life could ever be okay again. I have not lost connection with how difficult it is to go through tragic loss. I have not. It is so hard to bury a child. It's hard to bury two children. I held them in my arms and watched them gasp for breath when we removed them from life support. I fought with them for 7 and 13 days. I sat with doctors who told us that their brain injuries were just too extreme. We had to make horrible decisions. And when it all got wrapped up, I sat in a quiet house with 2 baby strollers, 2 cribs, 2 rear-facing car seats, and no babies, right? It was devastating. So this is not like I'm some exception or I'm that one person who just could see forward and knew that someday I could make sense of all of this. I wasn't. I was lost. I was hurt. I was overwhelmed. I was alone. I was scared. And I was so, so sad. And even in all of that, I told myself, Rachel, if you give up your power, you have nothing. And I just refused to do it. And now I spend my life making sure other people don't give up their power so that they have nothing, because I believe everybody has a contribution to make to this world that is life-giving. And if grief is stealing people's life-giving contribution, I want to help them fight to get it back.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I often think about that, like what your life is like constantly, you're just constantly surrounded by people grieving, like just people who are just sad and feel powerless. And it's
Yeah, but
mind blowing.
there's another side of that. So yes, I interact with people that are hurting and grieving every day, but I also get the privilege of watching them go from hurting and overwhelmed and confused and scared to more clarity, hope, relief, goals, dreams, purpose, right? I just had a woman message me the other day after our session. She's like, "You've completely changed my life." Right? I get to experience watching people tell me, I don't think I'm ever going to be okay again, and look me straight in the face and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
So are there moments? Do I cry with my clients? Yes. Do I hurt for my clients? Of course. Are there stories that I think, oh no, like, right when I think I've heard it all, I hear something else, right? But I also laugh with them, cheer them on, celebrate victories with them, hear them get excited about things, hear their breakthroughs, listen to that peace come back in their voice, that joy come back to their life. Like, it's really meaningful work. And I also do exactly what I teach. I self-care exceptionally well. It is
Mm.
like a non-negotiable in my life, because if I'm not self-caring, then I don't have enough to pour out. And I'm not going to peter out, because we're in this together. We made a commitment. I'm going to see you through till the end. They show up every day to do the hard work. I show up every day to do the hard work with them, right? So I'm going to do the bare minimum, make sure I'm taking care of myself. But I don't just work with grievers. I work with people that are healing.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I love that. And I am determined to become one of those people. I already am, I'm becoming one of those people literally, and it all started with you, in our sessions together. And I want to end with one quote that you actually already started talking about, but we didn't really like delve into it. So I want to end with one more quote that you had said to me. So I'll say it and I'll expound on it, what it meant to me. And if there's anything you want to comment on, you can. But I believe that I believe it was towards the end of our sessions together that you said this to me. But this quote summed it all up for me. Like when you said this, I could not write it fast enough because I was like, this is it. This is exactly what is happening in my life as a griever. So please help me navigate through it. Like you summed it up, but I was so thrilled to hear it. And which is why I couldn't have gotten to the place I am without you, or without your guidance, like yours at least. And so this was the quote that you said to me, and you referred to this earlier. Grief puts a magnifying glass on all the dysfunctional things in our life. Everything becomes a reevaluation when you have the least amount of energy to evaluate. And I think that is one of the greatest statements I've ever heard, actually, because it sums up why this time is so difficult for us grievers. Besides the fact that it's sad, we're dealing with sadness, trauma. A lot of times it's devastating. We miss them. Like those, it's hard enough to simply feel all of those feelings that comes with losing someone that we love. But then you enter into this world of grief, and it really does. It just magnifies everything in your life that needs to get worked on all at once. It points out all the things that are a little dysfunctional and puts a glaring red flag on them and says, like, hey, you need to fix me, like, right now. And you're over there in a puddle of tears on the floor going, like, yeah, okay, I have like a few other important things going on right now over here. But that is where at least what I like to call my comeback story is. That is where I want to empower anyone, but, specifically women for me to do this very difficult task, which is acknowledge all the dysfunctional things that grief puts a magnifying glass on. Whether it's your relationships, like we talked about, the state of your home, which is a lot of what I talk about, your health, which is another, journey that I'm on. Whatever it is, like acknowledge it and decide that you are not going to let your loss define your life moving forward. Decide that I am strong enough to pick myself up from this very low place and take charge over my own life and have power over my pain, in honor of this person that I lost and I love very much. And to take charge, over everything that's dysfunctional and turn it into functional, having power over your pain and to ultimately come through victorious. Now, disclaimer, and I know you will agree with me on this. This is not if you are like in the freshest, I just lost a loved one. I don't like putting a time frame on it because I really don't think there is one. But I'll say for me personally, I would say that 0 to 6 months, like none of this was happening, at least, probably even closer to maybe even a year. You have to give yourself lots of grace in those early days. Rachel talks a lot about that, and I won't get into, what you are supposed to be doing for yourself in those early days. That's her job. But the point is you're not building a comeback story right away. You give yourself grace when you need it and when you don't have the energy to do the hard things. But when you finally catch your breath and you find the strength within yourself to take hold of these dysfunctional things, that's when you get up and decide, I'm going to turn this dysfunction into function. And the first step to my comeback story, as I love calling it, was agreeing to grief counseling with you, with Rachel, because before I decided to get it, I was fending for myself. I was guessing at a lot of really serious things going on in my life. And not only did I not know how to deal with them, like neither did anybody else around me. So really what counseling did for me is it helped me get my life back, like one mini step at a time, and not just my old life, like a better life. And what Rachel helped me learn was that I don't have to live a certain way just because I'm really sad about my daughter dying. I can still have all of these other things that I really want to have in my life, including things like peace, joy, hope, happiness, laughter. And the same goes for all of you that are listening. Again, if you are in the earliest stages of your grief, you're not quite here yet. You are so fragile. And still probably coming down from some sort of adrenaline rush of whatever happened, I would imagine. But for those of you who have had some time to really let this new life of yours sink in, you can do this. You can have power over your pain, like I discovered that I can. You can take the death of your loved one and in honor of them, make something really incredible out of your life. And all you need are the right tools and the right resources. And yes, your journey is super unique. It's unlike anyone else's, but ultimately you are not alone in this. Many have gone before you, especially people like Rachel to pave the way for us, to help people just like you and me. And I truly hope this podcast specifically can be a resource, for you as well. Sorry, I went on a rant. But I'm very passionate about this. And
it was a good rant. Yeah. And I will say, because I agree with you, there is a season for just grieving. Okay. Not
Yes.
grieving to get to someplace or for something, right? We're just grieving. But this is
Yes.
what I tell all of my clients in that space of just that hard phase of grief. For some of us, it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, 18 months. Like there's
Right.
no time limit. But it's when you're in that place, don't allow your pain to make you come to certain conclusions. It's one thing to be in pain. It's another thing to let our pain tell us you'll always be in pain.
Yeah.
And so I just caution them all the time, like, don't let your pain start becoming your truth. Your pain is your pain, but it's not your truth. And then you will, if you in fact want healing in your life, you will have that moment, that shift, that day you wake up, that thought in your head where you go, I think I want more than this. Right? Maybe even if it's just a little, but
Yeah.
survival mode, overwhelming pain and grief is just not where I want to stay. And then you take that first little step towards that. And you get a little taste of that. And then you go, maybe I want a little bit more. And you start seeing yourself as powerful and capable, because even when you don't have the strength, because there was a moment in my grief where I had to realize it wasn't that I thought I didn't have the strength. I didn't have it. I was tapped out.
Right.
But that didn't mean I couldn't reclaim it. I couldn't build it. I couldn't restore it. And that's what I mean by don't let your pain become your truth. Because pain says you've hit a limit, but truth says, but you can recover. Right? Pain says this is permanent. Truth says, no, it's not. It's temporary, even if it's lasting a while.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we don't start allowing our pain to be our truth. If you can get past that and allow your pain to be data and inform you, not have the final say, you can direct yourself any way you want through your pain. You become the one who leads your grief. Your grief doesn't lead you.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So good. Oh my gosh, Rachel, I seriously cannot rave about you enough. Grief counseling was one of the best decisions I ever agreed to do. And you specifically really helped me in so many ways. And you weren't just a counselor, but you really became a friend of mine. And although I wish this isn't really how we met, I'm so grateful that, 16 years ago, you decided to make that choice to have power over your pain, because you are helping so many other people get through some really, really dark times in their life. One last thing before we sign off, can you please tell everyone where they can follow you on social media or how they can connect with you if they're interested in doing grief counseling with you?
So I call myself the Grief Gal. And if you go to the Grief Gal on Instagram, but it has 2 underscores between each word, Instagram, it's a little tricky sometimes. You can follow me there. I also have a website, thegriefgal.com. You can go there for information. And the best way to reach out to me, in all honesty, is to send me an email at Rachel, Rachel, at thegriefgal.com. I'm very responsive. I will reach out. We'll probably set up, a free consult call or just some time to connect and talk, see what you're going through. You make sure we have a rapport, and then it'll be very easy for me to advise next steps for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So much good knowledge was talked about, so I hope you are listening carefully. Be sure to watch for my future episodes, and of course, a positive review is always super helpful. I can't wait to chat with you again very soon. Signing off for now, your hope dealer, Emmy Smaczniak.